So I want to talk about abstinence before marriage, and let me just say that this is not a religious conversation. I'm not going to make a moral argument. Non-religious people, they like to dismiss these kinds of discussions, because they say, well, it's just religious. It's fundamentalist. But I think it's kind of funny in a way. It's kind of ironic because those same non-religious people will also insist that you do not need to be religious in order to act with wisdom and prudence. And, that's religious people don't have a monopoly on that. They'll say, well, saving sex for marriage is without question the wisest and most prudent path. I don't think any rational person would deny that, or can deny it convincingly. Yet it is a wise and prudent path that we are told is only open to the religious. I disagree with that. I guess I have a higher opinion, of non-religious people than non-religious people have of themselves, because I don't see it that way. Yeah, it's true that religious people generally believe in saving sex for marriage. I mean, they believe in it. Ideally, how successful they are in following through is a different matter. But so it's true that they believe in it, but it's not true that you have to be religious in order to see the wisdom in such a strategy. And I think if you wish to address our most serious social problems, if you desire the benefits that could come from solving these problems, then you should advocate for abstinence before marriage, whether you're religious or not. It doesn't matter. This is a practical position. Now, it may be a spiritual position as well, but that's not, those two things don't necessarily have to be linked all the time. Like, I also believe that that murder is wrong, and that is I believe that spiritually, I believe it's wrong because the Ten Commandments says that it's wrong, because God says that it's wrong. But I would still advocate outlawing homicide, even if the Ten Commandments didn't exist. And I would hold that position for very obvious and practical reasons, right? Well, I think the same is true of saving sex for marriage. I'm not comparing having sex before marriage to murder. I'm just saying that, you can make a very practical argument in favor of it. And I think anyone can see the benefits of that path, and anyone can pursue that path, regardless of religion. So now what I want to do is I want to talk about the great societal crises that could be solved, or at least greatly reduced, by keeping sex within the framework of a monogamous and lifelong marriage. So I'm not going to say anything, you'll notice I'm not going to say anything about sin or avoiding hell or anything like that. It's a different discussion from the one that I'm going to have right now. I want to talk about the temporal, practical benefits of this course. And I think that, it's a very difficult thing when we look at our cultural problems and we say, how are we going to solve these problems? But then at the outset, we rule out the most effective solutions. And it seems like we're always doing that. There's like the fundamental basic solution that gets right to the root of the problem. But we rule that out. We always rule those solutions out because those are lifestyle solutions. Those are solutions that require sacrifice and effort and hard work. And so we rule those out, and we say, no, not that, but let's find something a little bit further up on the tree, right, that we can, let's find a solution that's a little bit further up here, that's a little bit closer to the surface, a little bit more superficial, and therefore easier. And I just don't think it works. I think we have to get to the root of it, and that's the only way to solve some of these problems. So let me go through a list here of a few of the problems that could be solved, or as I said, reduced anyway, by saving sex for marriage. Number one, pretty obvious: fatherlessness. Okay, there are basically three ways that a child can end up in a fatherless home. One is divorce. We'll talk about that in a minute. The other is death. And obviously death can't be solved in any way. So that's always going to be an issue. But both of those categories are in the minority. In fact, the number of never married single mothers, that is single mothers who got pregnant out of wedlock, that number is greater than the number of divorced and widowed single mothers combined. Okay? So fatherlessness and all of the terrible consequences that come with it, prison, drug abuse, dropping out of school, all the mental health problems, all of these things that many times stem from fatherless, all that could be cut in half through abstinence. Number 2, divorce. So divorce itself, that's another way that a kid will end up in a single parent home. And divorce itself, if we saving sex for marriage as a society, that could greatly reduce divorce. Studies have consistently shown that marriages between people who have never had sex with anyone else, virgin marriages, we call them, those are less likely to lead to divorce than marriages between previously sexually active people. In fact, even marriages between people who were previously sexually active only with each other, so cohabitate, people who cohabitate, shack up together before getting married, those arrangements are more likely to lead to divorce than couples who, were absent before marriage and didn't live together before marriage. 3, poverty. So now we can tie together the first 2 items on the list. Simple fact of the matter is the statistics are pretty clear on this. Children are 4 times as likely to be impoverished if they live in single-parent homes. The statistics are there are only 8% of children in married households are poor, while over 40% of children in single-parent households, usually single-mother households, are poor. That's an incredible, that is a incredible statistic. Yet almost half of the kids in single-parent homes are poor, while you have a very tiny minority in married households who are poor. I think maybe that's something we should look at. And considering that most of those children were born to unwed mothers, the connection between poverty and sex before marriage, I think, should be pretty evident. Number 4, STDs. We are currently experiencing an STD epidemic in our country. Sexually transmitted diseases are at record highs across the country. There are more reported cases of chlamydia, more cases of gonorrhea, more cases of syphilis than ever before. And here again, obviously, you save sex for marriage, you don't have to worry about this. 2 people who have sex, who save sex for marriage and then keep sex within marriage, they don't have to worry about this problem at all. They can laugh it off. As far as they're concerned, don't have to worry about it. So it's a wonderful thing. When you're in a committed marriage and you're in a faithful marriage, it's a wonderful thing. You don't have to worry. You have no fear. Not a problem. Not an issue. Right. Number 5, abortion. According to the Guttmacher Institute, which is a pro-abortion institute, only 14% of the women who procured an abortion last year were married. That means that the abortion rate could be cut by 86% if sex were saved for marriage. And then number 6, sexual assault, I think, could be greatly reduced by saving sex for marriage. Now, obviously, getting married isn't going to protect a woman absolutely from getting raped. Nobody would claim that. But I think the strategy would reduce the problem in places like college, on a college campus and in other environments where assaults often occur within the context of a booze-fueled hookup culture. So a woman can significantly, not completely, but significantly insulate herself from that risk by withdrawing herself from that scene entirely. And if the hookup culture were abolished, if it didn't exist anymore on college campuses, then the problem of sexual assault on college campuses would all but disappear. Now, I know that the response, so what's the response to everything that I think this is a pretty clear argument, pretty logical, right? There's no denying that these problems could be very significantly addressed by saving sex for marriage. What's the argument against it then? Well, people will say, you could solve most of these problems with safe sex, right? Just use contraception, and it gets rid of most of these problems. But here's the thing. And then the corollary to that is we have to make contraception, birth control, we have to make it more available to people so that will cut down on these issues. But here's the thing about that. Contraception is already readily available everywhere. Anyone can obtain some form of birth control for low cost or no cost. So the idea that we need better access to birth control it's idiotic. Anyone can go to any gas station, any convenience store, any drugstore, any Walmart, any Target, any grocery store, and get contraception for very cheap. I mean, you can get it for free in many medical clinics. How much more accessible can it possibly be? How much more accessible do you need it to be? Do we need the government to start doing airdrops, literally dumping vats of condoms from the helicopters? Like, do we need to send out the National Guard to cities across America in helicopters with vats of condoms, just dropping them, sprinkling them across the ground like a morning dewdrop, so that when you walk out of your house in the morning, it's littered with birth control pills and condoms? Would that be accessible enough? No, I'm sure we'd even be told then, even that's not accessible enough. It's not enough access. People are going to say, you know what, I need someone from the government to walk into my house every morning and place birth control into my hand. That's for free. That's the only way it'll be accessible. I mean, it's just, it's ridiculous. It is. This stuff is extremely accessible. People talk about birth control. It's like the feminists who say that they need free birth control, or they need birth control to be covered by their health insurance for free or whatever. They talk about birth control as if you need $6,000 and some kind of certification, some sort of license to buy a condom. You don't. It's ridiculous. This stuff is super available and super cheap. Yet, STD rates are skyrocketing. They're at historic highs. Fatherlessness is a huge problem. Out of wedlock births is a huge problem. Abortion is a huge problem. And these problems are all worse now than they were 50 years ago, when birth control really was hard to come by. How do you explain that? I mean, we should see if access to birth control is going to solve these problems, considering birth control has become much more accessible over the years, we should be able to look at a chart of these other problems like STDs, out of wedlock births, etc. And we should, while birth control is doing this, the problem should be doing that, right? That's what we should see. Like, if there's an actual, but that's not what we see. In fact, with a lot of these problems, it's more like this. That's something that, that's interesting, isn't it? Maybe there's no such thing as safe sex outside of the bonds of a committed marriage. Or do we need another 50 years of evidence before we come to that conclusion? Do we need another 50 years of shoving birth control down everyone's throats and then seeing these problems not only get worse? Do we need how much more time do we need before we can start drawing some obvious conclusions? Maybe safely having sex with a stranger that you met at a party is about as possible as safely driving drunk. You can mitigate some of the risk to some extent by wearing a seatbelt, even if you're driving drunk. If you get behind the wheel of a car completely plastered, you might say it's safer if you put a seatbelt on, just as you can mitigate some of the risk to some extent by wearing a condom. But the act itself in both cases is fundamentally reckless and dangerous. And so really the only safe course of action is to just not do it. Think about it. We're saying to 16-year-olds, like you got sophomores, juniors in high school. And we're saying, hey, if you're going to do this thing, that could directly result in pregnancy and life-altering diseases, do it safely. And for us, safe means taking a drug or using a device that will hopefully insulate you maybe from some of the effects of the act. Maybe, again, we should consider this. There is no safe sex aside from sex with your spouse. There's no substitute for self-control, discipline, fidelity. There's no good argument against self-control, discipline, and fidelity, other than the fact that those things require effort. But that's not an argument. That's just a complaint. Let me mention one other thing. People will say that abstinence before marriage is unrealistic. And, you know, first of all, I could just as well say that safe sex is unrealistic, because obviously a lot of people just aren't willing to take those precautions. I mean, you can talk about safe sex all you want. Pretty clearly, many people are just not, they're not going to do it. So can't I make the same argument and say that the safe sex thing is unrealistic? And I could, I think it's relevant here to point out that that just because a solution is challenging doesn't mean that it's wrong. In fact, the fact that it's challenging is evidence that it's right, because there are no easy solutions for difficult problems. If life has taught us anything, it's that you cannot solve difficult problems easily. If the solution is easy, that's a good indication that it's not a real solution. So when someone says, I'm going to solve your obesity with a pill, that sounds great. If someone says, sit on the couch, eat whatever you want, make no changes, here's a pill, I'll solve your obesity, that's a pretty good indicator. That's what we call too good to be true. If a person's solution for obesity does not include diet and exercise, then their solution may be fun, but it's not a good solution. And I think that principle holds just pretty much with every big problem you can think of. So there's that. But I will admit that as things are currently set up in society, abstinence before marriage, as things are currently set up with our society the way it is now, abstinence before marriage is an extremely difficult proposition. Difficult because humans, the way that we work is that we develop intense sexual desires at the time of puberty, which is around 13 or so. But the average age of marriage for men is almost 30, and for women it's almost 28. So to be abstinent before marriage requires, according to the average trajectory, it requires 15 years of celibacy. And those 15 years happen to be the 15 years when the desire for sex is the strongest. And we also happen to live in a society where sex is being pushed in front of your face constantly every day. So it is indeed quite a big thing to ask of somebody, to expect a guy to go through 15 years feeling the intense desire for physical companionship with women, and in the midst of a sex-crazed culture, and yet to remain celibate the whole time. That's a big thing to ask of somebody. And most people aren't able to do that, aren't, willing to do it. So they become sexually active years and years before marriage is even on the table. It's not just that they become sexually active before marriage. They become sexually active before marriage is even, a possibility. And then we have all these problems that I mentioned before. So then what's the solution? Well, here's one. Get married earlier. This idea of waiting forever to get married is very new. It's very Western. This idea that marriage should be kind of the capstone of young adulthood. Again, very new, very Western. It's not the way it used to be. Marriage was the foundation, the cornerstone of young adulthood. Like, you got married right at the beginning of young adulthood, and it was the kind of the first step in the door of adulthood, and then from there you did everything else. That's how it used to be. And now we've taken it and we put it at the end. This is not how our ancestors handled it. Even just in the 1960s, the average age of marriage for women was 20. For men, it was 21 or 22. And this also, that makes a lot more sense biologically as well, because a woman's most fertile age range is 20 to 24. And then her fertility declines dramatically in her 30s. But now we wait until our 30s to get married, and everyone's wondering then why they can't get pregnant. And now why, everyone's going to fertility clinics and everything, saying like, what's going on? Nobody can get pregnant. Well, it's because everyone is spending their most fertile periods having sex with strangers. And then when they finally settle in with a spouse and they say, let's start a family, they can't anymore. I mean, just this whole strategy, it makes no sense. It doesn't work. It's dysfunctional on every level. The way that we approach sex and relationships and marriage, it's dysfunctional. It's not working. It's bad. It's not working. Look at the evidence. So even though I know, this isn't going to happen, I think if we're really talking about real solutions, what we would start advocating for, we would advocate for two things: abstinence before marriage and earlier marriage, right? That's what we would add if we're really serious about it. Because here's the important point. There is no solution to these problems that does not include a drastic lifestyle change, and a drastic cultural change. There is no solution that will alleviate us of the, from the need to make those kinds of changes. Telling everyone to use contraception, that's not a cultural change. That's not a lifestyle change. And so that's why it's not working. Because these problems stem from not just obviously physically, they begin with the sexual act, but at a deeper level, they stem from certain lifestyle choices that we make now and cultural attitudes that we have about marriage, sex, relationships. We have to change those attitudes and those lifestyles. And again, if we're not willing to do that, if we're ruling that out as a possibility, then we're just not going to solve any of these problems, and we might as well stop talking about it. And we might as well just accept that. I mean, you could talk about safe sex all you want, but people are going to use a condom. They're not going to use a condom. Whatever, they're going to do whatever they want to do. And I mean, one way or another. Look, one way or another. If we are just accepting that people are going to have sex for 15 years before they ever get married, then we're just accepting the fact that all these problems are going to be very common. So let's talk about real solutions. That's my proposal, and I know nobody's going to take me up on it, but I thought I'd throw it out there anyway. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for listening, and have a great weekend. Godspeed.